The evening sun cast long shadows across the pristine golf course of Pine Valley Country Club, where Alexander Pierce stood among his wealthy peers, nursing an aged whiskey. At 35, he had already built a tech empire worth billions, but tonight, something else entirely would change the course of his life. The conversation had started innocently enough, talk of business deals and market trends. But as the evening wore on and drinks flowed freely, the topic shifted to relationships and marriage. Alexander watched with growing discomfort as his fellow club members spoke with unveiled prejudice about interracial relationships. "Money can't buy everything," chuckled Richard Thompson, a silver-haired investment banker, his golf club swinging lazily in his hand. "Some lines just shouldn't be crossed in our circles." Alexander felt his jaw tighten. He had always prided himself on being different from these old money snobs, even though he often played their games to maintain business connections. The casual racism disgusted him, yet he had always stayed silent. Not tonight. "Actually," Alexander said, setting down his glass with deliberate care, "I believe love knows no boundaries, and I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is." The group fell silent, all eyes turning to him. A warm breeze rustled through the perfectly manicured trees, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and approaching rain. "Is that so?" Richard's eyebrows rose, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Can't to make it interesting." $50 million, Alexander stated firmly, surprising even himself. "I bet I can marry a black woman and maintain a happy, successful marriage for at least a year." The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the laughter, not just from Richard, but from the entire group. They thought he was joking. He wasn't. "You're on," Richard finally said, extending his hand. "But I get to choose the woman." Alexander's heart raced as he shook Richard's hand, sealing the bet. He expected Richard to choose someone impossible, someone who would never give him the time of day. What he didn't expect was the name Richard announced. "Dr. Maya Washington," Richard declared with a triumphant smile. "The new head of neurosurgery at City General. Good luck getting her attention. She's known for turning down every man who crosses her path." Alexander had heard of Dr. Washington. Who hadn't? She'd made headlines as the youngest person to head the neurosurgery department, and her innovative surgical techniques had saved countless lives. She was brilliant, beautiful, and completely out of his usual social circle. That night, as Alexander drove home in his Tesla, the weight of what he'd done began to sink in. The bet had started as a way to stand up to prejudice, but now he realized he was about to play with someone's heart to prove a point. The rain had started falling, matching his growing unease. He pulled up Dr. Washington's profile on his phone at a red light. Her professional headshot showed a woman with confident eyes and a warm smile that seemed to hide 1,000 stories. She had graduated top of her class from Johns Hopkins, pioneered several surgical procedures, and dedicated her free time to running medical camps in underserved communities. Alexander ran his fingers through his dark hair, thinking about his next move. The betting contract would be drawn up tomorrow, and then there would be no going back. He told himself this was about taking a stand against prejudice, about showing his peers they were wrong. But as he stared at Maya's photo, a nagging voice in his head whispered that he was no better than them, treating her like a prize to be won in a rich man's game. Thunder rumbled outside as he pulled into his mansion's driveway. His house staff had left for the night, leaving him alone with his thoughts in the enormous empty house. As he walked through his pristine marble hallways, past priceless art pieces that had lost their meaning, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to step into something much bigger than a simple bet. He needed a plan. He couldn't just walk up to Dr. Washington and ask her out. She'd see right through that. No, he needed to orchestrate a natural meeting, something that wouldn't raise suspicions. As he poured himself another drink in his study, he began researching everything he could about her work, about her passions. Little did Alexander know, as he sat there plotting his approach, that this bet would unravel his carefully constructed world in ways he could never imagine. The game he was about to play would change not just his life, but Maya's too. And the stakes were far higher than $50 million. Alexander spent a week carefully planning his first accidental meeting with Dr. Maya Washington. He learned she got her morning coffee from a small cafe near the hospital, always arriving precisely at 7:15 a.m. before her rounds. It wasn't stalking, he told himself, just research. One crisp morning, he timed his entrance perfectly, walking into the cafe just as Maya was reaching for her drink. He pretended to be absorbed in his phone, bumping into her slightly. Coffee splashed onto the floor, missing them both. "I'm so sorry," he said, looking up to meet her eyes. "Please, let me buy you another one." Maya looked at him with a mixture of annoyance and amusement. She wore simple scrubs under her white coat, her natural hair pulled back neatly, yet she carried herself with more grace than any of the socialites Alexander usually met. "It's fine," she said, already turning to leave. "I'm running late." "Then let me have them deliver it to your office," Alexander offered quickly. "City General, right? Dr. Washington." She paused, studying him with newfound suspicion. "Do I know you?" "No, but everyone knows about your groundbreaking work in pediatric neurosurgery," he said smoothly. "I'm Alexander Pierce. I've been following your research on minimally invasive techniques." Her expression softened slightly. "You're interested in neurosurgery?" "Actually, I'm interested in funding it," he replied. "My company's looking to invest in medical innovation. Maybe we could discuss it over lunch sometime." Maya checked her watch, clearly weighing her options. "I don't mix business with pleasure, Mr. Pierce." "Just business then," he smiled. "Strictly professional." She finally cracked a small smile. "Send the proposal to my office. If it's worth my time, we'll talk." Over the next few weeks, Alexander orchestrated more chance meetings. He joined the hospital's board of directors, ensuring their paths would cross at meetings. He attended medical charity events where she spoke. Each time, he made sure their interactions seemed natural, unplanned. But Maya wasn't easily impressed by wealth or status. During their first lunch meeting, she grilled him about his intentions for the medical research funding. "These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, Mr. Pierce," she said, her passion evident. "These are children's lives we're talking about. I need to know you understand that." As she spoke about her patients, her dreams of making advanced medical care accessible to everyone, Alexander found himself forgetting about the bet. Her words painted pictures of hope, of real change. She wasn't just brilliant, she was genuinely caring. One evening, after a particularly long board meeting, he found her in the hospital garden, looking tired but determined. "Rough day?" he asked, offering her a cup of coffee, her usual order, which he'd memorized. "Lost a patient," she said quietly, accepting the cup. "Sometimes, no matter how hard you try." Alexander sat beside her in silence, understanding that no words could help. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over them. "Why are you really here, Alexander?" she asked suddenly. "And don't give me the investment speech again." He turned to look at her, the rehearsed lies dying on his lips. In that moment, with her eyes searching his face for truth, he almost confessed everything. Instead, he said, "Because you're different from anyone I've ever met." Maya laughed softly. "That's what they all say." "No," he insisted, "you're someone who actually cares about making a difference. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" She studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected either," she admitted. "But I've learned to be careful with expectations." As they sat there, sharing a comfortable silence, Alexander felt the weight of the bet pressing down on him. Maya wasn't just some pawn in his game anymore. She was becoming someone he genuinely looked forward to seeing. That night, Richard called to check on his progress. "The bet's still on, right?" Richard's smug voice crackled through the phone. "Because I've got 50 million reasons to hope you fail." Alexander watched the city lights twinkle below his penthouse window. "The bet's on," he replied, his stomach churning. "But you might want to keep that money handy." After hanging up, he stood there for a long time, wondering how something that started as a simple challenge had become so complicated. Maya's face kept appearing in his mind, not her professional smile, but the genuine one she'd shown him in the garden. For the first time in his life, Alexander Pierce was afraid of winning a bet. Spring turned to summer, and Alexander found himself spending every free moment with Maya. Their lunch meetings had evolved into dinner dates, and professional discussions about hospital funding had transformed into long conversations about life, dreams, and everything in between. One warm evening, they walked through the city park after dinner, ice cream cones in hand. Maya was telling him about her latest patient, a 7-year-old boy who'd made a miraculous recovery. You should have seen his face when he took his first steps after surgery, she said, her eyes lighting up. That's why I do this, Alexander. Those moments make all the hard days worth it. Alexander watched her as she spoke, noticing how the setting sun made her skin glow. The bet that had started all this felt like a distant nightmare now. She was wearing a simple sundress instead of her usual scrubs, and somehow she looked even more beautiful. I've been thinking, he said, gathering his courage. Would you like to come with me to my beach house this weekend? It's quiet there, away from the hospital and business calls. Maya raised an eyebrow. A weekend away? That's a big step, Mr. Pierce. Too big? He asked, trying to hide his nervousness. She was quiet for a moment, finishing her ice cream. My mother always warned me about men like you, you know. Rich, charming, supposedly different from the rest. And what do you think? Alexander held his breath. I think, she said slowly, that for once my mother might be wrong. That weekend changed everything. They walked barefoot on the beach, cooked meals together, and talked for hours on the deck overlooking the ocean. Maya told him about growing up in a middle-class family, about the sacrifices her parents made to put her through medical school. Alexander shared stories about building his company from scratch, though the guilt of his secret bet made him hold back certain details. You know what I love about the ocean? Maya said one evening as they sat watching the sunset. It doesn't care who you are or where you come from. It treats everyone the same. Alexander felt his heart tighten. He reached for her hand, and she intertwined her fingers with his. The moment felt perfect, and that made it even worse. Back in the city, their relationship deepened. Alexander found himself showing up at the hospital late at night with dinner when she was working long shifts. Maya started leaving a spare set of clothes at his penthouse. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, as if they'd known each other for years instead of months. One day, Maya invited him to help at one of her free medical camps in an underserved neighborhood. Alexander arrived in his usual expensive suit, but soon found himself rolling up his sleeves and helping to set up equipment. You're full of surprises, Maya said, watching him interact with the patients. I didn't expect you to be so hands-on. There's a lot you don't know about me, he replied, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. That night, after treating dozens of patients who couldn't afford regular medical care, Maya shared her dream of opening a chain of free clinics across the city. Alexander listened, already mentally calculating how to make it happen. I could help, he offered. We could make this dream a reality together. Maya looked at him with such trust and affection that it physically hurt. You really mean that, don't you? I do, he said, and in that moment he truly did. Later that week, Richard cornered him at the country club. Looking pretty cozy with Dr. Washington, he smirked. Remember, it's not just about getting her to date you. Marriage is part of the deal. Alexander felt sick. He'd been avoiding thinking about the bet, trying to pretend it didn't exist. But it did, and with every passing day, every genuine moment with Maya, the weight of his deception grew heavier. That evening, he took Maya to his favorite rooftop restaurant. As they sat under the stars, she talked about her future plans, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Alexander reached into his pocket, feeling the small velvet box there. The ring had belonged to his grandmother, a simple but elegant diamond that had been in his family for generations. As he looked at Maya, laughing at something he'd said, he knew he wanted to give it to her. Not because of the bet, but because somewhere along the way, he'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with her. But the bet still haunted him. Would she ever forgive him if she found out? Could their love survive such a betrayal? As he fingered the ring box, Alexander realized he was standing at a crossroads. The path forward would change both their lives forever, one way or another. The morning everything fell apart started like any other. Maya woke up in Alexander's penthouse, kissed him goodbye, and headed to the hospital. She had no idea that by evening, her world would shatter into pieces. The email arrived during her lunch break. Dr. Washington, there's something you need to see, it read, followed by an attached video file. She almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, but something made her click play. The video showed Alexander at his country club, that fateful night 6 months ago. The quality wasn't great, but his voice came through clearly. $50 million. I bet I can marry a black woman and maintain a happy, successful marriage for at least a year. Maya washed it 3 times, her lunch growing cold on her desk. Each time, she hoped to find some hint that it wasn't real, that there was another explanation. But Alexander's voice, his confident smile as he shook hands with Richard Thompson, told her everything she needed to know. Her phone buzzed. A text from Alexander. "Dinner tonight? I have something special planned." Maya's hands shook as she set the phone down. The ring she'd found in his jacket last week, which had filled her with joy, now felt like a mockery. All those moments they'd shared, all those late-night conversations and tender kisses, were they just part of his strategy to win a bet? She cancelled her afternoon surgeries, something she'd never done before. Her head nurse took one look at her face and didn't ask questions. Maya drove home in a daze, memories flooding her mind. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, "Be careful, baby. Men like that, they don't see us as equals." Maya had defended Alexander, insisted he was different. She told her family about him last week, proudly introducing him at Sunday dinner. They'd been cautious but welcoming, won over by his charm just as she had been. The story broke on social media that afternoon. Someone had leaked not just the video, but the entire betting contract. Maya's phone exploded with notifications, messages from friends, family, colleagues. Even her patient's parents were calling, offering support. At 6 p.m., Alexander arrived at her apartment, roses in hand and ring in pocket, ready for what he planned as the perfect proposal. Instead, he found Maya sitting in her darkened living room, the video playing on her laptop. "Maya," he started, his face draining of color. "I can explain." $50 million, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "That's what I was worth to you?" "No, it's not like that anymore." Alexander stepped forward, but Maya held up her hand. "Do you know what hurts the most?" she continued. "I actually believe you were different. I defended you to everyone who doubted you. My family, my friends, they all warned me, but I was so sure they were wrong." "They were wrong," Alexander pleaded. "Yes, it started as a bet, but what we have now is real. I love you, Maya." "Love?" Maya laughed bitterly. "Love doesn't start with a price tag, Alexander. Love doesn't turn someone into a game piece." She stood up, walking to her window. The city lights twinkled below, unchanged despite her world crumbling. "You know what's ironic? I was going to say yes. When I found the ring last week, I was so happy I cried. I thought I'd finally found someone who saw me for who I am, not what I am." Alexander felt tears forming in his own eyes. "You did find that person. The bet, it was wrong, I know that. But it led me to you, and you changed everything." "Did I?" Maya turned to face him. "Or am I just playing my part perfectly in your $1 million performance?" The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Maya walked to her door and opened it. "Please leave," she said softly, "and don't come back." "Maya, please." "You won your bet, Alexander. Congratulations. Now get out." After he left, Maya sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by memories of their time together. Photos of them at the beach, the coffee mug he always used when he stayed over, the spare key he'd given her to his penthouse, all of it felt tainted now. She picked up her phone and called her mother. When she heard her mother's warm, concerned voice, Maya finally broke down. Through her tears, she could hear her mother's gentle words, "Come home, baby. Just come home." That night, as Maya packed a bag to stay with her parents, her phone kept buzzing with messages from Alexander. She didn't read them. Instead, she typed out one final text. The truth wasn't worth $50 million, was it? Then she blocked his number, turned off her phone, and walked out of her apartment, leaving behind the pieces of a dream that had never been real in the first place. The scandal hit the headlines like a thunderstorm. Tech byline is $50 million. Racist BET ex POSED screamed the morning news. Alexander's phone wouldn't stop ringing, but he couldn't bring himself to answer any calls. He sat in his penthouse, staring at the last photo he'd taken with Maya, both of them laughing at some forgotten joke. The business impact was immediate. 3 major companies pulled their partnerships with his tech firm. The hospital board called an emergency meeting to discuss his position. His social media accounts exploded with angry messages. But none of that mattered compared to the pain he'd caused Maya. Maya threw herself into her work, performing surgery after surgery with mechanical precision. Her colleagues watched her with concern, but she maintained a professional facade. Only in quiet moments, when she caught her reflection in the hospital windows, did she allow herself to feel the weight of what had happened. "Dr. Washington," a nurse called one morning, "there's a delivery for you." It was a massive arrangement of her favorite flowers, sunflowers and white roses. Maya didn't need to read the card to know who sent them. She donated them to the children's ward without opening the attached note. At his office, Alexander faced the consequences of his actions. His PR team suggested various damage control strategies, but he rejected them all. "Mr. Pierce," his PR director insisted, "we need to release a statement." "No," Alexander said firmly, looking out his office window. "I don't deserve to defend myself." He watched as another company publicly ended their contract with his firm. His phone buzzed. Richard Thompson calling again, probably to gloat about winning the bet. Alexander had already transferred the $50 million to Richard's account, even though technically he'd succeeded in marrying Maya. The money meant nothing now. At her parents' house, Maya found comfort in familiar surroundings. Her mother kept her busy with simple tasks, helping in the garden, cooking family recipes, anything to keep her mind occupied. "You know what makes me angry?" Maya said one evening, helping her mother fold laundry. "I actually thought I was changing him, making him see the world differently." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Maybe you did, baby. Sometimes people learn their lessons too late." Back at his penthouse, Alexander couldn't sleep. He roamed the empty rooms, remembering Maya's presence in each one. Her coffee mug still sat in the kitchen cabinet. Her favorite blanket still draped over the couch. He couldn't bring himself to move any of it. One morning, he overheard two employees in the elevator talking about Maya. "Did you see Dr. Washington on the news? She started a program for minority medical students." Alexander rushed to his computer and found the interview. Maya looked tired but determined as she spoke about creating opportunities for underprivileged students interested in medicine. She didn't mention him or the scandal once. That night, he made an anonymous donation to her program, enough to fund scholarships for 20 students. He knew money couldn't fix what he'd broken, but maybe it could help Maya's dream of making medicine more accessible. Meanwhile, Maya faced her own challenges at the hospital. Some patients requested different doctors after learning about the scandal. Others expressed sympathy she didn't want. She considered relocating to a different hospital, starting fresh somewhere else. "You can't run away," her father told her over Sunday dinner. "You've built something important here." He was right. Maya had worked too hard to let anyone drive her away from her patients, her research, her purpose. She threw herself into establishing her scholarship program, channeling her pain into something productive. One evening, as Alexander walked through a park they used to visit together, he saw a young couple sharing ice cream, just like he and Maya used to do. The sight hit him harder than any business loss. He sat on their favorite bench, pulled out his phone, and started typing an email he knew he'd never send. "Dear Maya, I keep thinking about all the moments I could have told you the truth. That first coffee shop meeting, our weekend at the beach house, the night you told me about your dream to open free clinics. I was falling in love with you in every one of those moments, but I was too much of a coward to be honest. You deserve to know that none of it was fake. My feelings for you were real. Are real. But I understand that doesn't matter anymore. Some mistakes can't be fixed with money or apologies. I hope one day you'll find someone worthy of your trust, someone better than me." He deleted the draft and walked home in the rain, letting it wash away his tears. In his pocket, his grandmother's ring felt heavier than ever, a reminder of the future he destroyed with his own hands. Across town, Maya stood at her hospital office window, watching the same rainfall. A photo of her with her medical team still sat on her desk. Alexander had taken it at a hospital fundraiser. She'd thought about removing it but decided against it. The pain was part of her story now, but it wouldn't be the ending. 3 months after the scandal, Alexander sat in his office staring at a proposal on his desk. His company had lost 30% of its value, but that wasn't what kept him up at night. He'd been thinking about Maya's dream of accessible healthcare, and finally he knew what he had to do. "You want to do what?" his board of directors asked when he presented his plan. Transform our empty office building downtown into a free medical center, Alexander repeated firmly. And that's just the beginning. The board members exchanged worried looks. One spoke up, "Mr. P.S., we're a tech company, not a healthcare provider." "No," Alexander agreed, "but we have the resources to make a difference. And it's time we use them properly." He didn't tell them this was inspired by Maya. He didn't mention how he'd spent weeks studying healthcare accessibility in underserved communities. This wasn't about winning her back, it was about becoming the person he should have been all along. The project consumed him. He'd hired the best doctors, bought top-quality equipment, and ensured the clinic would serve anyone who walked through its doors. When someone leaked his involvement to the press, he didn't hide. "This isn't about publicity," he told reporters at the clinic's construction site. "It's about doing what's right." For the first time, he spoke openly about his privileged background and his journey to understanding his own biases. "I made terrible mistakes," he admitted in an interview. "But mistakes can either break you or teach you. I'm choosing to learn." Word of the clinic reached Maya through hospital gossip. She was performing fewer surgeries now, focusing on training new doctors and expanding her scholarship program. When she heard about Alexander's project, she felt a mix of emotions she couldn't quite name. "He's actually doing it," her mother said one evening, showing her a news article about the clinic. "Remember when you told him about wanting to make healthcare accessible?" Maya nodded, remembering that conversation like it was yesterday. "He listened," she said softly, surprising herself with the lack of bitterness in her voice. Alexander threw himself into community work, showing up at local meetings, listening to residents' concerns. He hired people from the neighborhood, ensuring the clinic would provide jobs as well as healthcare. One day, while reviewing applications for clinic positions, he found a letter that moved him to tears. A young student wrote about growing up watching her mother choose between medicine and food. "Places like this clinic," she wrote, "could have changed my childhood." He hired her immediately as a community liaison. The old country club crowd watched his transformation with mockery. Richard Thompson made sure to remind him at every opportunity about the bet he'd lost. "Was it worth $50 million?" Richard asked at a charity event they both attended. Alexander looked at him steadily. "No amount of money is worth what I lost. But maybe some good can come from my mistakes." The clinic's opening day arrived 6 months after the scandal. Alexander stood back, watching families stream through the doors. Children played in the bright waiting room while parents filled out paperwork. The staff, many from the local community, worked with pride and purpose. A small boy tugged at Alexander's sleeve. "My sister's sick," he said. "Can the doctors here help her?" Alexander knelt down to the child's level. "Yes, they can. And you don't have to worry about money, okay?" The boy's mother, standing nearby, wiped away tears. Alexander felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about redemption anymore. It was about making real change. That evening, alone in his office, he wrote another email to Maya. Unlike the others, he sent this one. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your dream of accessible healthcare is becoming reality. The clinic is open to anyone who needs it. This isn't about us. It's about them, the people who deserve better than what the system gives them. You taught me that real change comes from action, not words. I'm trying to live that lesson every day. Take care. Alexander." He didn't expect a response, and he didn't get one. But the next day, he noticed that Maya had shared the clinic's information on her professional social media page. It wasn't forgiveness, but maybe it was acknowledgement. At home that night, Alexander looked at his reflection in the window. The man staring back wasn't the same one who'd made that stupid bet at the country club. That man had seen everything as a game to be won. This man understood that some things, like trust, love, and doing what's right, were beyond any price tag. A notification popped up on his phone, another donation to the clinic's fund. People were starting to believe in the project, to see it wasn't just a publicity stunt. Alexander smiled, thinking of all the families who would get help here. He'd lost Maya, but he'd found a purpose. And maybe that's what real redemption looked like, not grand gestures or public apologies, but quiet, consistent work to make things better. 1 year after the scandal, Maya stood at the podium of a medical conference, presenting her research on innovative surgical techniques. The audience listened intently as she shared her findings, but her eyes caught something unexpected: Alexander sitting quietly in the back row. He looked different, more humble somehow, with a few gray hairs at his temples that hadn't been there before. He wasn't trying to get her attention, he was simply taking notes like any other attendee. After her presentation, Maya found herself lingering in the conference hall. Doctors and researchers approached her with questions, but her mind kept drifting to his presence. She hadn't seen him in person since that night she'd asked him to leave her apartment. "Dr. Washington," a voice called. She turned to find Lisa, the community liaison from Alexander's clinic. "I just wanted to thank you for sharing our program information. We've helped over 2,000 families this year." Maya smiled genuinely. "I've heard wonderful things about the clinic. You're doing important work." "Mr. Pierce insisted we implement your scholarship program model," Lisa continued. "It's changed so many lives." Before Maya could respond, she spotted Alexander heading toward the exit. Their eyes met briefly across the room. He gave her a small, respectful nod and turned to leave. "Wait," Maya found herself saying. She wasn't sure why she called out, but something had shifted inside her. Alexander stopped, turning slowly. The conference crowd moved around them like a river flowing around two stones. "Would you like to get coffee?" Maya asked, surprising herself, to discuss the clinic's progress. They found a quiet cafe nearby, away from the conference crowd. The awkward silence between them felt heavy with unspoken words. "I saw the article about the clinic's expansion plans," Maya finally said, stirring her coffee. Alexander nodded. 3 more locations by next year. The need is greater than we expected. Maya raised an eyebrow. "The community runs it now," he explained. "I just provide resources. They know what their neighborhoods need better than I ever could." Maya studied him. The arrogant billionaire who'd once made a cruel bet was gone. This man spoke with humility and purpose. "Your mother was right," he said suddenly. "About what?" "Everything." Alexander looked down at his coffee. "About me, about privilege, about the importance of seeing people for who they are, not what they represent." Maya felt tears threatening but held them back. "Why did you come to my presentation today?" "Because you're still doing amazing work," he answered honestly. "Your research will help countless people. That deserves support, regardless of our past." They talked for hours, not about their relationship, but about medicine, community needs, and future projects. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the cafe windows, Maya realized something had healed inside her, not completely, but enough. "I have a proposal for you," she said carefully. "Purely professional." Alexander waited, not daring to hope. "The clinic needs a neurosurgery department," Maya continued. "I could consult, help set it up properly." "The community would be grateful," Alexander replied softly. "And so would I." As they left the cafe, the city lights beginning to twinkle around them, Maya thought about how life sometimes moved in unexpected circles. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else. Wisdom, maybe, or strength. "Maya," Alexander said as they prepared to part ways, "I need you to know something. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trying to win you back. But what we had was real. At least it became real. And I'm sorry it took losing you to become someone worthy of that reality." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "I know," she said finally. "That's why I can work with you now. Because you understand what went wrong, and you've actually done the work to change." They stood there on the sidewalk, 2 different people than they'd been a year ago. The bet that had brought them together had also torn them apart, but perhaps it had forced them both to grow in ways they needed. "I'll have my office send over a proposal for the neurosurgery department," Maya said professionally. Alexander nodded. "And I'll make sure you have complete control over its development." As they turned to go their separate ways, Maya called out one last time, "Alexander." He turned back. "Thank you," she said softly, "for making my dream of accessible healthcare come true, even if everything else fell apart." "Thank you," he replied, "for showing me what really matters in life, even if I learned the lesson too late." They walked away from each other under the starlit sky, not back to what they had been, but forward to what they could become. 2 people who had learned difficult lessons about love, trust, and the true value of human connection. The story that had begun with a cruel bet had transformed into something neither of them expected. A chance to make real change in the world, even if their own love story hadn't survived. Sometimes, Maya realized broken dreams could build better realities and endings could become different kinds of beginnings.